This subcommittee will come to order. Without objection, all members will have 5 days to submit statements, questions, and extraneous materials for the record, subject to the length limitation in the rules. I will now make my opening statement. Trade is critical to the national economy of the U.S. For example, manufacturing jobs related to trade pay 18% more than manufacturing jobs that are not. Trade plays a key role in new jobs. If a company wants to expand, it has to reach new customers because 95% of the customers are outside the United States. Trade is the lifeblood of my hometown of Houston, Texas. Over half of Houston's economy depends on trade. Houston has one of the largest ports in the world, and it is the oil and gas capital of the world. Overall, trade supports more than 1 out of 5 jobs in Texas, and Texas has been the top exporting state for 12 consecutive years. This is not just for large businesses either. 93% of Texas exporters are small and medium-sized businesses. Texas is the #1 state, and Houston, Texas is the #1 city when it comes to receiving support from XM. There is no question about the importance of trade. We need trade to grow. What we're looking at today is the federal government's role in trade. Before us today, we have 3 agencies in the federal government that promote trade and investment. The Export-Import Bank is the official U.S. export credit agency. It provides direct loans, loan guarantees, and export credit insurance to help finance U.S. exports of goods and services. The Overseas Private Investment Corporation, or OPIC, is the official U.S. development finance institution. OPIC seeks to promote economic growth in developing economies by providing political risk insurance, project and investment fund financing, and other services to U.S. firms investing in those countries. The U.S. Trade and Development Agency, or TDA, seeks to link U.S. businesses to export opportunities overseas that lead to economic growth in developing and middle-income countries by funding a range of pre-export activities. The question before us today is, do we need these agencies? 60 other countries have export credit agencies of their own. Supporters of reauthorizing XM Bank argue that if Congress allows the XM Bank to expire, then these 60 other countries will be happy to jump in, put our American companies at a competitive disadvantage, and take business away from the U.S. Some users of XM say they will go out of business without XM. Critics of the bank respond that subsidizing companies has no place in a free market system. But some of these same critics support government subsidies for terrorism risk insurance, flood insurance. They support the FDIC and the National Credit Union Share Insurance Fund. There is also substantial disagreement about exactly what this costs the taxpayer. Critics say due to some tricky accounting standards, taxpayers are left holding the bag while the agencies themselves argue they return a surplus to the U.S. Treasury every year. Critics argue that Congress enacted reforms during the XM Bank's 2012 reauthorization, but claim that these reforms were never implemented. XM disagrees, saying that it has completed and implemented all reforms. While trade promotion agencies are supposed to promote trade that helps the U.S., many Americans have questions about helping foreign companies that are in the U.S. economy. Do big state-owned enterprises, or SOEs, deserve taxpayer dollars on top of the money they get from their own governments? And what about American companies that are trying to compete against these industries? At the same time, these agencies have a special focus on helping small business. 25% of XM authorized money went to small businesses last year, exceeding its 20% requirement. Over the past 5 years, 75% of OPEC supported projects have involved a U.S. small or medium-sized business. Just last month, a former Export-Import Bank loan officer pled guilty to taking more than $78,000 in bribes for fast-tracking unqualified loan applications. OPIC has similar examples of fraud. This is a good sign that fraud is identified and perpetrators are punished, but there seems to me that more could be done to prevent fraud in the first place. So my hope is that this hearing can bring some clarity to this debate. The American companies just need a level playing field to compete. No one innovates as well as the U.S. From the iPhone to hydraulic fracturing, the United States is the world's leader in coming up with new ideas that create new jobs and a higher standard of living for everyone. For example, If you add up the 20 countries the United States has a trade agreement with, American manufacturers run a $50 billion trade surplus with them. That's what happens when we combine the strength of American spirit with a level playing field. American companies win. Before returning to the ranking member for his opening remarks, I'd like to submit to the record the testimonies in support of reauthorizing the Ex-Im Bank from the Nuclear Energy Institute, Texas Association of Business, Texas Association of Manufacturers, and over 300 businesses in Texas. Hearing no objection, all of these testimonials from these 300 different groups in support of the Ex-Im Bank will be made part of the record. Now I'll turn to the ranking member, Mr. Keating, and the gentleman from Massachusetts may give his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for conducting this timely and bipartisan-spirited hearing, and thank you for our witnesses for taking the time to testify here today. The agencies that are the subject of this hearing, the Export-Import Bank, the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, and the Trade and Development Agency, each serve vital U.S. interests. Since its founding over 8 decades ago, the Ex-Im Bank has helped finance U.S. exports of goods and services and contribute to U.S. employment where alternative financing is unavailable, or to counter government-backed export financing by foreign competitors. It's estimated that the Ex-Im Bank helped to finance approximately $27.5 billion worth of American exports and supported more than 164,000 American jobs in fiscal year 2014 alone. Small and medium-sized U.S. businesses benefit greatly from Ex-Im Bank's products, particularly its working capital guarantee, which enables small businesses to obtain loans to purchase raw materials and supplies, and its export credit insurance, which covers the risk of non-payment by international buyers and extends credit to qualified foreign customers. The businesses that use these products aren't Fortune 100 companies. They're companies like Deacon's Cranberry Products, Inc., a family-owned small business in Carver, Massachusetts, in my district, that sells cranberries and cranberry products to Europe, Canada, Mexico, South America, and Asia as a direct result of the support provided by Ex-Im. Since using Ex-Im Bank's export credit insurance, Deacon's Cranberry sales have reached $60 million, approximately 15% of which is export-related. The companies like Resin Technology of Groton, Mass., whose Vice President Carly Seidewand is attempting to be here today and share in how Ex-Im's working capital guarantee has helped her company. The company founded by her father. It increased sales and expanded its workforce as a result. As our economy continues to grow, it's essential that the Ex-Im Bank continue to provide its valuable service to thousands of American exporters and their families. For this reason, I'm a co-sponsor of H.R. 1031, the Promoting U.S. Jobs Through Export Act of 2015, which would reauthorize the Ex-Im Bank charter through 2022. I'm often intrigued by the answers I receive when I ask my peers and colleagues which company they believe is the largest American auto exporter. In today's ever-connected global economy, the answer should not surprise you. It's BMW Manufacturing Company. In 2014 alone, BMW exported $9.2 billion worth of passenger vehicles through the port of Charleston, accounting for more than 260,000 vehicles. BMW's facility in Spartanburg, South Carolina, remains the largest U.S. automobile exporter another year running. Last year, this facility announced $1 billion investments in production capacity to increase to 450,000 vehicles, making it the largest BMW plant in the world. In this increasingly global economy, it'd be irresponsible for this Congress to fail to reauthorize the Ex-Im Bank, which pays for itself and enables U.S. manufacturers to sell more products abroad and create new, good jobs here at home. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this important and timely bipartisan hearing. Within the 2nd Congressional District of South Carolina, which I represent, is Zeus Corporation of Orangeburg, Prismium Cable of Lexington, and HEY of Aiken. These three companies share a common bond. They all produce parts for the Boeing 787 Dreamliner, which is currently being built outside of Charleston, South Carolina, and in the last 5 years, they now have 8,000 employees at the facility in Charleston. Zeus Corporation manufactures the tubing for the aircraft. Prismium Cable makes the internal cable, and HEY produces the key interior components of the Dreamliner. Additionally, Thermal Engineering of Columbia provides composite painting of the Dreamliners, creating jobs. As we continue to debate reauthorization, hope we can focus on the fact of jobs and that more than 60 competing international export credit agencies that undercut and destroy American jobs daily. In a perfect world, the Export-Import Bank would not be needed, but unfortunately, Mr. Chairman, we do not live in a perfect world. I am really grateful to hear my colleague from Massachusetts. We share a real appreciation of BMW. It is the largest single facility of BMW, and South Carolina now is the leading exporter of cars. We're also the leading manufacturer and exporter of tires. And so with Michelin, with Bridgestone, Continental, Getty, our state has made such progress, and I'm particularly grateful to find out that our friends and neighbors of Massachusetts appreciate this too. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman. I request that members keep their statements to 1 minute, but in due to bipartisan equal time, Mr. Sherman, you have 1 minute and 30 seconds.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, thank you for holding this hearing. Been very involved in export administration agencies. When I sat in that chair, this subcommittee wrote a new charter for OPIC, which passed the House of Representatives and, of course, the full committee overwhelmingly. Unfortunately, for reasons that escape me, there is the United States Senate. But I want to commend you, Ms. Littlefield, for following through regulation many of the policy provisions that were in the bill that passed this committee and the full committee by an overwhelming vote. The hot issue now is XM. Mr. Chairman, unlike you, I gave 100 speeches in favor of the candidacy of George McGovern. But even I don't believe
That's a true statement.
That is a true statement. All of my statements are true. I do not believe in unilateral disarmament. Germany, Japan, Korea, and China have export promotion authorities which, as a percentage of their economy, dwarf XM Bank. And the idea that American companies should be trying to export and face competition from those agencies without the help of Mr. Hochberg would astound me. And finally, the XM Bank actually makes money. You will hear that there is something called fantasy accounting in which they lose money. Let me assure you as a CPA, and I'll agree with the CBO, if we didn't have XM, we would have to cut the budget, assuming we didn't want to increase the deficit. And those cuts might very well come from foreign operations. I yield back.
Chair recognizes the gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Perry, for his opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Folks, thanks for being here. President Roosevelt created the Export-Import Bank in 1934 to promote U.S. sales overseas by providing loans to foreign entities looking to purchase American goods. Sounds like a good deal. However, when the government subsidizes an export for one company, other companies in the same sector might not get the same benefit and oftentimes hurts their sales and job creation. The XM Bank may help a few American business, but at times it is definitely at the expense and hurting of others, and we've heard from them. Some people categorize this as corporate welfare programs that pick winners and losers and have no rightful place in U.S. trade policy agenda. Although I think that unilateral disarmament, as has already been stated, is concerning, I think we should also be focusing on reducing the burden of domestic regulations and taxes, which will spur productivity and employment while reducing the role and the necessary role of the federal government in the U.S. economy, and understanding that 98% of sales abroad are done without the XM, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The chair recognizes the gentleman from New York, Mr. Higgins.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, for holding this hearing. The U.S. trade promotion agencies play a critical role in boosting U.S. exports. They provide the bulwark against foreign governments that heavily subsidize their own domestic industries. In my Western New York community, the Export-Import Bank has supported over $100 million in exports and more than 600 jobs. Furthermore, the Export-Import Bank is self-sustaining and has generated more than $7 billion in excess revenues to the United States Treasury. Failing to undertake a long-term reauthorization of the bank would only serve to hurt American businesses and workers. I look forward to the discussion today. Thank you for being here.
Gentleman yields back. Does anybody else wish to be recognized for an opening statement? Without objection, all witnesses' prepared statements will be made part of the record. I ask that each witness please keep your presentation to no more than 5 minutes. We have 2 panels, and I'll introduce the first panel, and then they can give their opening statements. Fred Hochberg is Chairman and President of the Export-Import Bank of the United States. Mr. Hochberg has previously served in a variety of positions in the private and public sector, including acting administrator for the Small Business Administration. Mrs. Elizabeth Littlefield is President and Chief Executive Officer of the Overseas Private Investment Corporation. Ms. Littlefield previously held several positions in relating to finance and development and was a recipient of the Secretary of State's Distinguished Service Award in 2012. Ms. Zak is Director of the U.S. Trade and Development Agency. Prior to joining USTDA, Ms. Zak was partner in the Washington and Boston offices of Mintz, Levine, Cohen, Ferris, Glavaski, and Papio, PC, and taught at several law schools around the United States. Mr. Hochberg, we'll start with you, and you have 5 minutes.
Chairman, Ranking Member, and distinguished members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify about the role that EXIM plays in promoting commercial diplomacy, a critical component of American foreign policy. In May 2012, EXIM was reauthorized with overwhelming bipartisan support, 330 members in the House and 78 in the Senate. The 2012 reauthorization also put in place a number of reforms, and let me underscore, each and every one of those reforms has been implemented. Since then, the bank has continued to support U.S. private sector job growth, including 164,000 jobs last year alone. We've also generated, as has been stated, billions of dollars for the taxpayers, including $675 million sent to the Treasury for deficit reduction in 2014. EXIM fully believes and works with the private sector to support U.S. job growth. And we do this in 2 ways. One, when the private sector is unwilling or unable to do so to provide financing to exporters. And secondly, when U.S. exporters face foreign competition backed by other governments, EXIM works to level the playing field for U.S. businesses and their workers. At one time, EXIM financed defense exports. However, since 1968, Congress has prohibited the bank from financing most military sales. While almost all of EXIM financing is commercial, U.S. companies with a defense presence can still benefit from EXIM nonetheless. W.S. Darley is a fire equipment producer headquartered in Illinois that manufactures in both Wisconsin and Iowa with a supply chain throughout America. Darley is a company that works in both the commercial and defense sectors. One way that Darley keeps its workforce fully deployed is by balancing between the two, with roughly half their business being commercial. Recently, EXIM financing empowered them to sell 32 fire trucks to Nigeria, supporting 100 jobs. On top of that, the sale included training services for public service employees in Lagos. This transaction is but one example of how when countries build things together, they often form lasting bonds that go far beyond the commercial to serve our national interest. In addition, as directed by Congress, the bank requires some of our larger transactions to be shipped on U.S.-flagged vessels, thereby supporting a strong merchant marine. Over the past 2 years alone, more than $90 million in shipping fees have been paid by foreign buyers to the U.S. merchant marine. U.S. businesses operate in a global economy. American businesses and workers aren't simply competing against Chinese, Russian, or French counterparts. Often, they're competing against whole nations. Last week, I met with my foreign counterparts to discuss the future of export credits. Congress has made it clear they would like the Treasury Secretary to ratchet down export credits. However, what I heard from Europe to Asia to South America was just the opposite. Our foreign counterparts intend to accelerate financial backing for their exporters, as well as serving as a much-needed backstop. When commercial banks withdraw from regions or sectors that are experiencing downturns, export credit agencies step forward and fill the gap so that domestic exporters don't lose sales or workers. In some way, Ex-Im is like a fire truck. You don't sell off the fire truck just because you haven't had a fire in the past few years. We appreciate the widespread support, bipartisan support of Ex-Im, and we're eager to continue to support American jobs as the bank has done effectively and efficiently for over 8 decades. Providing long-term certainty to U.S. businesses seeking to compete in overseas markets is imperative. Businesses need to make long-term plans to grow global sales, hire more workers, and invest in innovation. Those sales, in turn, lead to greater economic stability, both in the U.S. and abroad. And for all nations, economic stability is the foundation of security and peace. In closing, as Congress considers reauthorization of Ex-Im Bank, I trust this committee will keep American competitiveness at the forefront. We appreciate the subcommittee's interest. We look forward to working with you to empower your constituents to export more, hire more American workers, and strengthen America's economic resilience for the global age ahead. Thank you, and I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Hochberg. The chair recognizes Ms. Littlefield for her opening statement.
Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Keating, and members of the committee, thank you for inviting me here to testify before you today. I am Elizabeth Littlefield, the President and CEO of the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, OPIC. OPIC is the U.S. government's development finance institution. It mobilizes private capital investment flows into poor and developing countries to help solve critical development challenges, and in so doing, it advances U.S. foreign policy and national security objectives. We do this by providing long-term loans, guarantees, and political risk insurance to businesses investing much-needed capital into these developing countries, capital that would not be invested there without OPIC's financing and risk mitigation services. And because businesses are willing to pay the full cost of our services and more, OPIC generates income for the taxpayer and has done so reliably for 37 straight years. Since the end of World War II, a strong bipartisan consensus has recognized the fundamental link between poverty, economic instability, and conflict. In conflict-vulnerable nations, foreign direct investment helps to create jobs, opportunity, hope, and stability. At the same time, OPIC's support helps our U.S. clients, a large majority of whom are small businesses, to tap into those fast-growing, dynamic, emerging markets, creating jobs both at home and abroad. Today, OPIC manages just under 600 long-term investment projects in over 100 developing countries, principally in critical infrastructure, in power, private education, private healthcare, low-income housing, and microfinance and other financial services, all of these being sectors that contribute powerfully to sustainable economic development. In every one of these projects, our private investors also have their capital at risk. Every one of these projects is centered on achieving positive and measurable development impact, and every one of those aims to be commercially viable. So OPIC uses the power of the markets and business to tangibly deliver American development and foreign policy goals. The agency is effectively development that pays for itself and more. More than 1/3 of OPIC's entire portfolio is invested in post-conflict nations or nations currently vulnerable to conflict. My own work at OPIC reflects these national security priorities. While I've been at OPIC, I've been on the ground in Haiti, Liberia, South Sudan, Afghanistan, Jordan, Egypt, Tunisia, and others to help draw investments into those fragile countries. In Afghanistan, OPIC's large portfolio of investments includes a Kashmir processing facility, a state-of-the-art water bottling facility, and a highly successful small and medium enterprise lending facility created in partnership with USAID, which now supports successful job-creating businesses in and around Kabul. In Iraq, OPIC's investment portfolio supported the reconstruction of that country in many, many ways, ranging from microfinance lending to low-income housing to a dredging project to clear Iraq's waterways. In Haiti, OPIC worked with USAID and a U.S. company to deliver micro-mortgages and housing reconstruction loans after that earthquake. Even South Sudan. I traveled to Juba immediately following the initial peace agreement to identify critical infrastructure projects that could potentially be financed taxpayer-free with private sector investment. So in closing, OPIC's goal is to help fragile market economies grow and stabilize so that the odds of conflict are reduced, or to help restore the foundation of a market economy after a conflict as our troops begin to come home. As former Secretary of Defense Robert Gates once put it, development is one of America's great giant force multipliers. We agree. Every single dollar that OPIC extends has a multiplier effect for national security, it has a multiplier effect for development, and it has a multiplier effect for the taxpayer, as every $1 into OPIC's operations has generated up to $8 back to the Treasury, back in net deficit reduction. Mr. Chairman, this is why we believe that OPIC is smart, lean, and market-driven development. Thank you very much, and I welcome your questions.
Thank you, Ms. Littlefield. The chair recognizes Ms. Zach for opening statement.
Chairman Poe, Ranking Member Keating, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for your interest in USTDA's work to help U.S. companies create jobs here at home while promoting sustainable development abroad. As we were preparing for today, my staff came across a quote that was incredibly relevant to the topic of this hearing. It's from former Secretary of State Cordell Hull, who said, "When goods and products cross borders, armies don't." Secretary Hull understood what we at USTDA strongly believe, that robust diplomatic trade relationships mean resilient economies and secure nations. Now, more than ever, given the impact of globalization, America's prosperity depends on trade with strong, stable states. Establishing secure markets and fostering trade ties is exactly what we do. In fact, it's part of the unique dual mandate that Congress gave us. That is to promote U.S. private sector participation in development projects in emerging markets, with an emphasis on sectors with significant U.S. exports. USTDA approaches this mission in three important ways. First, we help to build infrastructure for economic development, stable markets for U.S. exports, and secure routes for global trade. Colombia, for example, has been a strategic focus of U.S. engagement in Latin America for decades. As part of this engagement, USTDA maintained an active portfolio to not only build the infrastructure in Colombia, but also to strengthen diplomatic and economic ties. During the negotiations of the U.S.-Colombia Trade Promotion Agreement, USTDA helped the Port of Cartagena comply with the U.S. Customs Container Security Initiative. The port implemented changes from USTDA's technical assistance with the help of goods and services from several states. Moreover, Cartagena's designation as a CSI port strengthened commercial relations while enhancing the safety and security of cargo. Second, our activities facilitate strategic partnerships that build long-term trade ties. USTDA's public-private partnerships help U.S. industry establish long-lasting connections with leaders from the world's fastest-growing markets. In fact, for those of you who have traveled to India, You probably didn't realize you were benefiting from the agency's U.S.-India Aviation Cooperation Program. The ACP has enabled U.S. and Indian officials to collaborate in several critical areas, including safety and security. Because of the relationships that the ACP has developed, the government of India asked USTDA for help in successfully restoring their Category 1 from the FAA. They have also asked us to help them develop the technical capacity to test, certify, and procure state-of-the-art aviation security equipment. These projects present a significant opportunity for U.S. industry to provide India with the solutions necessary to achieve international standards and to meet its security needs. The India ACP is critical to the success of these efforts. That is because they, like our other PPPs, fosters person-to-person connections, provides access to key stakeholders, and strengthens bilateral trade ties. Third and finally, I could not agree more with the Chairman's statement regarding leveling the playing field and U.S. business doing the rest. That's why USTDA helps level the playing field for U.S. firms competing in international tenders. Both our U.S. and foreign partners have told us about challenges presented by low-cost procurement systems. I know at first blush this doesn't sound exciting, but relying on lowest cost often means that a host country is forced to acquire poor quality goods and services, which is not in their long-term interest. We believe there is nothing low cost about buying something twice. Because we pride ourselves on listening to the needs of our stakeholders, we responded to this challenge by partnering with George Washington Law School to launch our Global Procurement Initiative. The GPI delivers customized solutions that target specific procurement issues. One of our first GPI countries was Vietnam, a long-term partner of USTDA. They asked for our help in partnering and implementing their national procurement law, which they revised to include low cost. The GPI embodies our agency's mandate. It responds to our partner countries' efforts to develop sustainable infrastructure projects. It also answers U.S. industry's call to level the playing field for greater international competition. Activities like these produce results for our foreign partners and for U.S. industry, and they provide a demonstrable return on taxpayer investments. USTDA's current multiplier, $76 in exports for every dollar programmed, is the highest in the agency's history. In
Ms.
fact,
Zack, I'd ask you to sum up your statement if you would,
Certainly.
because it's a part of the record.
Certainly. USTDA leverages the private sector. And what we have before us is a development model that is new and is effective. And with this development model, we lay the foundation for strong, stable states, states capable of preventing conflict, states capable of managing crisis, capable of promoting prosperity. USTDA's development model advances economic interests of the United States, and even more importantly, it safeguards U.S. national security. It ensures that U.S. goods and products cross borders, so our military doesn't have to. Chairman Poe, subcommittee members, thank you very much for having us here this morning. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you. Thank all the witnesses for being here. I'll start with myself and would ask that the witnesses be as brief as possible under the time restraints. Chairman Hochberg, I want to start with you. You may know that while we're having this hearing, there is a press conference down this next building over, pep rally, if you will, talking about the demise and end of Ex-Im Bank as we know it. Controversy here in Congress, and we've heard a lot on both sides, as you know. Few questions. Is the statement true that Houston, Texas is the #1 city in the U.S. that uses Ex-Im Bank for its businesses, small businesses? Microphone.
Sorry,
And
yes, it is.
Texas is the #1 state, is that correct? Or is it number
Texas is
two?
the #1 state in the country for exports. Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I would like to withdraw my support for Ex-Im Bank.
Okay, you may do that. I don't know if you've ever heard of Olney, Texas or not. I know you're from New York. Have you ever heard of Olney, Texas?
Oh, absolutely. One of our great American exporters is from Olney, Texas.
Air Tractor.
Air Tractor.
Air Tractor makes small planes that fertilize the fields and also does other things, fight fires. Olney is a town that's near Burnett and Flower Mound, in case you were interested where they are. David Eichert owns it, 200-plus employees. And I would like your answers to be based upon this statement that by him, that Air Tractor has been using XM for 20 years, has never filed a claim for money from the bank. In places such as Spain, Air Tractor has been selling for years. XM helped us to get a firm footing that they no longer need to use the bank. Other countries like South America, the company needs XM to get financing because smaller banks don't pay any attention to Air Tractor in Olney, Texas. Using this business as an example, a statement's been raised, and I think it's a fair question. Using XM Bank, how does that, if it does, deny equal competition from other businesses that don't use XM Bank in the U.S., other businesses that need financing as well?
I don't believe it does, sir. I mean, when we support Air Tractor, it's a great company. They have less than 300 employees in a town with about 3,000 people. It's a big business for a town of Olney, Texas, with 3 traffic lights. We support their exports to farmers in Argentina, Brazil, a lot of their farmers in Latin America that are not creditworthy without our export support, without our guarantee. We're not helping them when they compete in the United States. When they compete in the United States, they compete in a free and open market. The only time we help them is how they compete against other foreign competitors who are trying to take that sale away from them.
All right. Does XM Bank give loans to foreign companies?
We will do buyer financing. In the case with Air Tractor, we actually provide a guarantee that the foreign buyer will pay over a 5 to 6 year period, and then that's transferred over to, actually Wells Fargo Bank is the one bank that will work with them on these transactions.
Does XM work with American banks in the loan process, like Amegy in Texas, Wells Fargo, and other banks, or not?
Actually, Amegy Bank, we named our lender of the year this past year in 2015. But we also work with foreign banks. So we'll work with a bank that the buyer needs to work with in order to make sure we can provide the guarantee that will make the transaction go forward.
If XM works with foreign companies, how does that help the United States?
Well, in the case of Air Tractor, using that example, it's a foreign buyer who has a choice. They can buy either American-made crop dusters and firefighting equipment or foreign. So in that case, if the financing is the one thing that is needed to make that sale, the customer, the exporter has to deal with price, quality, value, service. We only can step in if financing is the one stumbling block and the private sector can't or won't do it. We can step in and make sure there's a level playing field so that they can buy an American product versus a foreign product.
How about state-owned enterprises? Some of the concern is that XM Bank helps foreign state-owned enterprises with financing. Comment on that, if you would.
Well, occasionally, yes. In many other countries, much more so in the United States, there are a lot of state-owned enterprises in transportation, in power, in utilities, in a number of those fields. And in that case, those state-owned enterprises have a choice to buy an American product or a Chinese or a Russian or a French product, particularly like in the utility field. So if that's the case, we want to make sure there's a level playing field, that American companies, American workers get an even shot at making that sale.
Last question. Let's go back to Air Tractor in Olney, Texas. No, there is no XM Bank. What are the possibilities? What would happen to Air Tractor in Olney, Texas without XM Bank?
Well, Dave Eichert recently said, when I asked him, he said it's a matter of 68 jobs. That's the number of people likely to lose their positions at Air Tractor if the bank isn't reauthorized by June 30th. Because right now, half their sales, more than half their sales, are export sales.
Chair will recognize the ranking member, the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Keating.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. unlike California, we're not worried about competition from Texas or any state in Massachusetts. We're prepared to take on any comers. But I would like to deal with the critics. Chairman Hochberg, get right to the point. The things that are heard are that XM is corporate welfare and it's for big business. I want you to address, I've demonstrated one in my district that's not a big business, demonstrate how it's for medium and small businesses. Number two, do U.S. taxpayers bear this cost? And number three, how do you address the critics that say, well, this can be done in the private sector. They could just step in and provide the same kind of export financing instead of XM, and take on those three with some information that you would have in detail.
Well, thank you, sir. Well, your first question you asked about corporate welfare. I frankly find that term confusing. Customers, people who use the bank, foreign buyers or corporations, they pay a fee. They pay a fee, just as Elizabeth Littlefield said at OPIC. People pay a fee for that service. They pay a fee for the service. We fulfill the service, and we turn over to Treasury the excess. Last year, $675 million. Welfare implies taking money from one group of people and handing it to somebody else. We have actually customers, clients of the bank, giving us money for a service. We render the service, and then the excess we send to the taxpayer. So it goes the exact opposite direction. 90% of our customers are small businesses like Air Tractor that the chairman mentioned, like Darley, a company I mentioned in my oral testimony. So I'm not sure I understand what that charge is. It has a nice ring to it, but it doesn't really have any meaning. In terms of taxpayer, we have reserves that are paid for. We collect a fee. We put aside loan loss reserves like any responsible lending institution would do. Congress, we're a zero appropriation. We're totally self-sustaining, which is required by WTO. However, Congress still appropriates about $100 million. The excess goes to the taxpayer. That loan loss reserve account is there as a backstop if in the rare cases we have a default. It's about $5 billion today. And our default rate, which we report, is one of the reforms from Congress in 2012. Every 90 days, we report our defaults to Congress. They're currently running at 0.167%, less than 1/5 of 1%. So, but those reserves are all paid for by customers and clients of the bank. They're not coming out of the taxpayer. And your last question about the private sector is who brings us in. When a company needs support to make a sale and to make sure we have the jobs in America, they will either go to a bank or they'll go to an insurance broker if they need insurance. The bank or insurance broker is the one that calls us in generally and says, we can't do this transaction without a government guarantee. That's certainly the case with Air Tractor. They cannot make those sales. A lot of banks are not anxious to make loans to farmers in Brazil and Argentina and other developing countries. Darley has made it very clear, they've said, if we're going to compete with our competitors in China and Austria and Germany, we have to come to the table with government-backed financing, just like our competitors do. So again, it's the private sector that's called us in order to make sure there's a level playing.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think that you're really concise on those criticisms that I don't think really warrant much material consideration. But it's good we address them, because I think we're, too many of us here, or it's not a bad thing, are all on the same page on this issue. Now, a question for Ms. Littlefield. You mentioned about OPIC's work in developing countries and how much of that centered on conflict in at-risk areas. You mentioned specifics about Afghanistan and Iraq. Could you give us a few specifics about Pakistan, Jordan, Egypt, or Tunisia as well? Because I think when people hear the details, they'll get a sense of how this can ameliorate the different conflicts around the world. Could you touch on some more examples and then how you find it helpful in terms of resolving these conflicts?
Absolutely. Thank you very much, Congressman. I can give you an example or two of each of those countries, but perhaps I'll start with Jordan because, as we all know, Jordan is one of the U.S. most staunchest allies and has been extraordinarily brave and outspoken against the forces of extremism. That tiny country is extremely poor. They're one of the fifth most water insecure countries on the planet Earth. Ever since the pipeline from Egypt, where they were getting their gas, has been blown up repeatedly, they are getting all of their fuel shipped up from Eilat to Amman in trucks, heavy fuel oil. And they've got anywhere between 750,000 and 1.2 million Syrian refugees all pouring into this tiny little country. This is a country where we've made a significant effort to identify U.S. partners that would help us invest in critical infrastructure there. For example, now our OPIX projects provide 25% of the power in that country of Jordan, 22% of the water flowing into Amman, its capital, and in partnership with USAID, we've created a small and medium enterprise lending facility in Jordan that's made 200 loans that are supporting enterprises that are creating 7,000 jobs, including jobs for Syrian refugees.
Good.
That's
I think
just
that
Jordan.
our time's up, but that's a great detailed explanation of just one country. In fact, just within the last several days, I've seen the refugee
Yes.
settlements in Georgia. And I would just like to emphasize how our subcommittee, Terrorism and Trade, how today's hearing shows the connection between those things. With that, I yield back, Mr. Chair.
Gentleman yields back his time. Chair recognizes Mr. Perry from Pennsylvania for his questioning. Mr. Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hochberg, in your prepared testimony, you state that XM fills gaps when the private sector is unable or unwilling to provide financing for U.S. exports, and a particularly important role for small business, of which there are several in the district I represent. What would you say your proportion of XM financing goes to small business?
Well, it's 90% of the transactions, and last year, 39% of the exports we financed were shipped directly from small businesses. And then, of course, there are many other small businesses in the supply chain of larger companies.
Let me ask you this. How does XM define small business?
We follow the Small Business Administration's definition. So however the SBA, and I was at that agency in the 1990s, they define what a small business is, and we use their definition.
Which is?
Well, it varies industry by industry. Basically, it's 500 employees or less, or a net worth of $15 million or less, but it does have some variation depending on unique industrial classification.
I'll go with you on the 500 employees, but it's my understanding that XM defines small business as having fewer than 1,500 employees, which skews the ratios then. What can you elucidate about that?
We follow precisely the SBA definition. We do not have there's no variance whatsoever between our definition and the SBA's definition.
All right, hold you to that in the future. Mr. Gutierrez, a former Export-Import Bank loan officer, of course, pled guilty to taking more than $78,000 in bribes for fast-tracking unqualified loan applications for approval. And he also admitted that in one case he ignored that a company had defaulted in 10 prior deals backed by XM at the cost of $20 million. $20 million is real money to me, real money to taxpayers, but still recommended the company for approval. I guarantee if I default on one loan, much less than $20 million, I'm out at the bank. I'm out. How many open fraud investigations and indictments are there currently involving XM Bank? Do you know?
The Inspector General stated most recently that there are 31 investigations, none of which have to do with employees, all have to do with outside companies that are trying to defraud the government.
And I understand that. Well, let me ask you that in this vein then, because I think sometimes we hear that and there's plenty of anecdotes on either side, but some in particular is the appearance of some kind of professional nepotism when we look at former New Mexico Governor Bill Richardson regarding his association with the Spanish energy company Abengoa's International Advisory Board. An investigation by the Daily Caller found that fully half of XM's advisors on the board in 2014 were executives at companies or unions that directly benefited from XM financing during their term. What is XM's plan to fix that?
Well, sir,
or shouldn't there be a plan?
The advisory committee was established by Congress to advise the bank, and a report is going to Congress in a few weeks on how competitive we are versus other export credit
And does it
agencies.
require people to sit on both XM's advisory board and work for the companies of which are receiving the loans from XM?
Generally speaking, they are clients of the bank because they're in the best position to advise
But does it
us.
require that they sit on both? But I'm asking you, what is XM? Congress requires an advisory board, but what is XM doing to ensure that there's not a quid pro quo, that there's not someone on both sides of the arrangement putting taxpayer dollars in peril?
There are strict ethical rules in place that none of them influence whatsoever any
Do you believe that
transaction
none of
that's
them influence that?
Absolutely.
I sleep with my wife. Do you think she doesn't influence me on my daily decisions regarding my children, my bank account, or what clothes? I'm serious. Do you believe that?
Well,
And do you think it deserves further scrutiny in that regard?
every advisory committee member is fully vetted. We have a full ethics briefing.
All right.
None of them
I
have
hear you.
anything
I
to
hear
do with
you.
any transactions whatsoever.
Let me ask you this. Why does XM understate the risk regarding being tied to Treasury securities, and it kind of inflates the appearance of profit because you don't consider the changes in the market based on Treasury securities? Why does XM do that particularly?
I'm not following your question, sir. We completely comply with U.S. accounting rules, FCRA. We've been audited by currently Deloitte Touche, previously by PricewaterhouseCoopers.
Why does
25
XM have a
years of-
different standard of default than every other bank that I've checked with?
We follow the default rules that have been promulgated by Congress and sent to us. That's how we report to Congress every 90 days. That 0.167% is in full compliance with the way Congress has defined it.
Thank you, Mr. Hockenberg. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield.
I thank the gentleman from Pennsylvania for his questions. The chair recognizes the gentleman from California, Mr. Sherman.
Mr. Hochman, I think it's entirely reasonable that you have an advisory board made up in chief of your customers. You know, there are very few vegans who are on the Ruth Chris advisory board. You want to survey your customers to see if you're doing a good job. Ms. Sachs, you quoted, I guess it was Cornel Hull about trade, a beautiful, poetic, often false characterization of history. If you make a list of Germany's chief trade partners in 1938, and then you make a list of the countries they were at war at with 1942, it's the same list. Same with Japan having as its chief trading partners China, Britain, and the United States. So trade is wonderful, but the idea that it prevents wars is more poetry than history. Mr. Hochberg, why it's in our national interest that our allies buy weapons from us some of the times? Do our weapons exporters face foreign government financing in competition? Do we lose military sales because there's a provision now in your charter that prevents you from financing military objects?
I can't verify whether we lose military sales, but I can state that Britain, France, Italy, Germany, their export credit agencies do finance their defense sales.
So unless they're stealing sales from us, they're wasting their time and the efforts of those European governments. I mean, obviously, we want to be careful, but we are careful as to who we export weapons to. And once the State Department determines that it is in our interest to export weapons, it is very much in our interest to export those weapons rather than see those other competing finance agencies. So I look forward to working with you after the demonstration dies down the hall, not only to keep you in business, but to allow you to do the work that will build American export capacity, build our defense infrastructure, and I love those other countries you mentioned, but I just as soon have all the defense infrastructure here. Now and then they're going to export weapons to countries we wouldn't want to see. Ms. Zach, sometimes companies are going to come to you and say, we need your effort to help our supply chain, our global, and what they're really doing is they're saying, we want you to help offshore jobs. Do you ever get sucked into providing assistance where in the name of a global supply chain for an American company, you're helping build the infrastructure, or otherwise help exports from other countries to the United States?
USTDA's mandate is very clear. We focus on U.S. jobs, not jobs abroad, and we do not help with jobs abroad.
Okay. And Mr. Hochberg, I'm sure you listen to the opponents of the bank. They have their rallies. Are any of them rallying for the elimination of the export financing authorities of Britain or Germany or China? Do you see any signs on that?
Not a single one, sir.
And are any of those signs saying, let's increase the U.S. budget deficit by $670 million per year?
I haven't heard that either, sir.
Are any of them proposing tax increases that would generate $670 million per year?
I've not seen that either.
So there's a sign shortage. I yield back.
I thank the gentleman from California. The chair recognizes the gentleman from South Carolina, Mr. Wilson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank each of you for being here. And the opportunity is really provided to create jobs. And as was stated by Mr. Keating, the state of South Carolina, we're so grateful to be the #1 exporter of cars. Who would imagine in 20 years from zero with BMW, and the last 3 years, the leading manufacturer of tires and the leading exporter. And this is by Michelin, which has the largest single investment in the world in the district I represent. Also, we're grateful for Bridgestone, Japanese, Continental German, and Getty, Singapore. So over and over, we see the benefit of trade. With that, Ms. Littlefield, with the Overseas Private Investment Corporation, how is the corporation funded?
Thank you very much, Congressman. OPIC was capitalized back in 1971 in the Nixon administration, and subsequently paid back all of the capital with which we were capitalized in the Reagan administration. And in the ensuing years since then, we've generated capital every single year back to the Treasury. So,
And this would be through fees?
through fees and commissions, we charge cost-covering fees and commissions and interest rate spreads, which our clients are more than happy to pay, since we're the only source of financing or insurance for them in these markets.
And so it's not taxpayer funded?
It is not taxpayer funded. We're a net reduction of the deficit every single year, sir.
And how much would be the net reduction on average?
In the last few years, it's ranged between $325 million and $425 million.
Thank you. And Mr. Hochberg, the same. How is the Ex-Im Bank financed?
By WTO, in order to be an allowable government support for exports, we have to be self-sustaining. We've been self-sustaining since 2007. We have sent to the Treasury just under $7 billion over the last 20 years. Last year, as the Congressman mentioned, was $675 million. The year before was more than $1 billion that was sent to the Treasury.
But there are accusations that you're conducting crony capitalism, but yet it's actually a payback for the benefit of the taxpayers.
Well, we don't receive the money. We actually just send the money to the taxpayers for deficit reduction each year. And CBO actually scores our budget, so it's actually used by the appropriators in budgeting for 2016.
Well, that's certainly a story that the American people and my constituents need to know. So thank you very much. And Ms. Zach, what types of criteria must a business meet to qualify for trade promotion and investment programs? What types of factor might prevent a company from receiving assistance?
Thank you very much. The first thing that USTDA looks at is, one, that it does create jobs in the United States. We focus on exports, and we also focus on development opportunities. We also ensure that there is additionality, that our services are needed to be able to move an activity forward to implementation. Then we undergo a very serious due diligence process, and we look at everything from the financial aspects, the legal aspects in our due diligence process as well. But we look for mutual interest, but jobs is one of our #1 criteria.
And In regard, again, Mr. Hochberg, the Ex-Im Bank charter specifically states that you will not compete with the private sector. And because of this, it's a bank of last resort. How do you ensure that people have attempted to use the private sector and not succeeded?
Well, customers actually have to state that on their application. They have to assert and certify that they are coming to us because they cannot get financing elsewhere. We verify that. I mean, frankly, candidly, with small businesses, I ran a small business for 20 years. It's pretty clear small businesses don't have a lot of options. But again, they're coming to us because a bank is bringing them to us or an insurance broker is bringing them because they cannot secure it independently. And sometimes we also have to level the playing field. When we see the kind of financing that China, Russia, France, Germany, and others do in different fields, when we see evidence of that, we want to make sure there's a level playing field that U.S. companies can compete, and we don't lose jobs because of outsized government financing on the other side of the transaction.
Thank you. And as I conclude, I appreciate again Mr. Keating giving me the opportunity to talk about the Port of Charleston. We just in the last month, Governor Nikki Haley secured from Daimler a $500 million investment for trucks. And then last Monday, Volvo Corporation announced its first North American manufacturing facility at Ridgeville, South Carolina, in the district of Congressman Jim Clyburn. So we see a huge benefit. Thank you very much.
The gentleman kneels back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Castro.
Thank you, Chairman, and thank each of the witnesses for your testimony today. And I want to pick up where the Congressman left off. Mr. Hochberg, can you describe some of the infrastructure for financing that foreign countries use that are comparable to Ex-Im? What are we competing against, basically?
Oh, well, we are competing for power, transportation. We've got a company called Acro that builds bridges in Cameroon and Ghana. There is intense Chinese competition to build that kind of infrastructure in Africa. We did a transaction on locomotives just last year. Half the order was split between the United States and China for locomotives in South Africa. We've done a power project where we also competed in West Africa. So I'm not just focusing on Africa, but frequently they are developing countries where we face intense competition in the infrastructure space.
And what are the European governments or the Asian governments doing for their businesses?
Well, to just give you an example, when I met with the customer Transnet in South Africa and inquired what was the Chinese terms for the loan so I would make sure that we were competitive, I was told, well, they asked me what I would like. Would I like a 10-year, 15-year, 20-year loan? Do I need a grace period? It was somewhat of a menu pricing. That was not the case. What we can provide, we adhere to international standards, and it's either 12 or 14 years for locomotives, and there are very fixed fees attached to that.
Sure. And, you know, I come from Texas, as the chairman does, and Texas does more trade than any other state in the nation. So this is obviously a very big deal for us. We have companies, big and small, but some like Boeing and Caterpillar who have a significant presence around San Antonio who benefit from Ex-Im. But I would ask all of you, what is at stake for a state like Texas if your services go away?
Well, on the second panel, you actually have a witness, Susan Jaime, who is from San Antonio, who can speak herself about her coffee exports that we chatted just before the hearing. About 40% of her sales are exports. When I talked to Air Tractor, a company mentioned previously from Texas, Dave Eichert talked about the potential of laying off 68 employees that are attributed to their export sales, which we're pleased working with them have grown from 10% of sales to 50% of sales. And most importantly, in the oil and gas field, which is laboring over a drop in prices, keeping that industry vital is important to America's national interest in terms of us having a presence globally and keeping our technology up. We do extensive work with the oil and gas fields, oil and gas companies, exploration, engineering, equipment manufacturers in the Houston area.
Sure.
Thank you, Congressman. We know that when U.S. companies invest capital in emerging markets, that creates a magnet in future years for exports to then flow. And we also know that 95% of the world's customers, as the chairman said in the beginning, are outside of these borders. This is where the markets are the most dynamic, they're growing, and this is where the future for American businesses is. In Africa alone, we don't talk about Africa much when we talk about trade, but in the next 10 years, the number of households with disposable income is going to grow by 50%. All of those households have reached the tipping point beyond subsistence where they can begin to invest in consumer goods and other things that U.S. companies are making. So it's critically important that we be able to have a level playing field, as my colleagues have said, and provide the services that U.S. companies need to access these markets, both in terms of their investments, which is the business of OPIC, as well as the exports that may follow, which is, of course, the business of EXIM.
Sure.
And just following on from what the chairman mentioned at the beginning and President Littlefield mentioned, 95% of the consumers are outside of the United States. This is a very important market, and that there is a need to level the playing field, which is one of the things that our agency does. And last year alone, since we were for every dollar programmed, we're seeing $73 in U.S. exports. We noted that there were $5.8 billion associated with our program, which is approximately a little over 3,200 jobs. So it's important to jobs, exports, and the future.
Sure. And then I'll just make one last remark in my last 15 seconds. You know, I support the reauthorization of EXIM and support the work that y'all are doing. I think every agency in the U.S. government deserves a thorough vetting and quite frankly could be improved probably. But you're running in the black. You're doing a great service for American companies. And I hope that this Congress can find a way to preserve the services that you're providing. I yield back, Chairman.
Gentleman from Texas yields back. Chair recognizes the gentleman from Wisconsin, Mr. Ribble, for his questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Hochberg, I'll go ahead and start with you and then go on to Ms. Littlefield. Just to kind of give you my own historical perspective, I'm a former business owner, and I have voted in support of reauthorizing EXIM in the past. I'm a little bit more sanguine today than I was 2 or 3 years ago, and in part, I'm sanguine because of the CBO's fair value accounting method to determine the actual cost to the taxpayer. I'm going to quote from the CBO's 2014 report. For fiscal years 2015 to 2024, CBO found that EXIM Bank's 6 largest credit programs would generate budgetary savings of about $14 billion under FCRA accounting, but cost about $2 billion on a fair value basis. They then go on to say later in the report, in CBO's view, fair value estimates provide a more comprehensive measure of the costs of federal credit programs, and CBO has provided fair value estimates for many programs to help lawmakers more fully understand the trade-offs between certain policies. That's a big swing, $14 billion plus to $2 billion negative over a decade. Would you care to comment on that?
Well, sir, we have one accounting system in the United States government. Congress passed an accounting system called Federal Credit Reform Act in 1990, and we fully comply with that. I ran a company for 20 years. We don't keep 2 sets of books. There's one set of books. Those are the books that Congress has determined. If Congress changes the accounting system, we'll change our operations. But one thing is unmistakable. We sent $675 million to the Treasury. We sent the year before over $1 billion. Cash is cash. If the accounting system were different, some of that cash would remain at the bank and would not transfer to the Treasury. It would build up more and more reserves that would be sitting at the bank's balance sheet instead of the federal government's balance sheet.
But wouldn't that go then to reduce taxpayer risk in case of default when the economy dips?
Well, first of all, we have over $5 billion of reserves paid for by customers. These are not taxpayer money. It's paid for by customers. You know, we send our default rate report to Congress every 90 days. Our peak default before the financial crisis was 1.6% in 2006. So if we're looking for a real stress test, we've had the most real stress test you can devise in the last 5-6 years, looking at the financial crisis we faced. And our default rate has steadily declined from that 1.6 level in 2006, going through the worst financial crisis we've ever incurred. So Nothing is certain in life, sir, but I think we've seen, one, a demonstration of good underwriting by our staff, and the fact is we do report this to members of Congress every 90 days. We just sent a report up for this March 30th period.
What is the current interest rate that you charge your customers?
Well, we provide, most of our credit is through either insurance or a guaranteed loan. So in a guaranteed loan, a bank essentially pays a premium, an insurance premium there, and thereby we guarantee the loan. Then the bank makes a loan to its customers. So most of the loans are either insurance or guarantee.
Okay.
In the rare cases, we make a direct loan, which is an unusual case, sometimes usually government to government or certain transactions. It's 100 basis points over Treasury, which is the global rules that we have to apply to.
Okay, and is that as well what the European Union's rates would be? So
Right. We all have to charge 100 basis points over the relevant Treasury rate for that currency.
Okay, you've heard the discussion between, it's been pretty widely publicized that Delta Airlines has got a problem because they wanted to buy Boeing airplanes and couldn't get it at discount. Air India got it at discount, now they're competing. So we gained jobs at Boeing, lost jobs at Delta. How do you respond to that?
Well, first of all, two ways, sir. One, we voluntarily do what's called an economic impact study. We're the only credit agency in the world that does this. We look at the benefits to the U.S. economy from an export, and we compare that against any potential loss to the U.S. economy, and we actually do that on every single transaction of the bank, down to $10 million and less, to make sure we're accretive to the U.S. economy. That's number one. Number two, Delta has sued us. 4 times the courts has ruled in favor of the Export-Import Bank, and we did double the fees that we charge foreign carriers back in 2011, and we make sure that foreign carriers are paying more than any U.S. carrier pays.
And I see I'm out of time, Mr. Chairman, so I'll yield back. Ms. Littlefield, I'll talk to you offline. Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. Chair recognizes the gentlelady from Illinois, Ms. Kelly. Turn on your mic, too. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd say most of us in this room recognize the importance of trade to the future of our economy. Accordingly, as we consider future trade deals, we must engage in a deeper, broader, and more inclusive dialogue about its impact on American families. The stated objective of U.S. trade policy is to liberalize markets by reducing trade and investment barriers, creating a rules-based trading system, enforcing commitments under trade agreements, and supporting economic growth. What role do Ex-Im Bank, OPIC, and TDA play in supporting U.S. trade policy goals?
Well, the Export-Import Bank obviously works closely with the other two panelists here, Commerce Department, U.S. Trade Representative, State Department. Our role is very narrow and very precise. It's to provide financing when the private sector is unable, when it cannot handle that transaction. And by there, our focus is really on U.S. jobs and making sure that we don't cede jobs to foreign competitors because they provide financing and U.S. companies don't have access to it.
Thank you.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Our OPIC's role is a little bit different as a development agency rather than a trade agency. So I would answer the question slightly differently and just say that we're all clearly in this room and elsewhere very concerned about the need to pay for stability and development in fragile places. And we know that we need to engage in these places for strategic, economic, and moral reasons. You know, OPIC's model may not be the only solution for stabilizing these markets, but it's certainly an incredibly effective one as it calls upon the private sector to shoulder some of the burden of helping address these issues and do so in a way that's actually creating income for those private sector investors as well as jobs both at home and abroad. Thank you.
And USTDA helps to build infrastructure. So with respect to trade, one of the things we do is that we help to develop infrastructure in other economies, but we want to ensure that it's done in a way that creates a fair playing field for U.S. businesses and jobs to be created at the same time. USTDA has also helped with respect to the implementation so that we ensure that standards that are required under trade agreements are met as well.
I yield back the remainder of my time. I have to go vote, Mr. Chair.
Thank the gentlelady. Just from Mr. Rohrbacher's information, there's a vote in another committee, not on the floor.
All right.
And with unanimous consent, unless there's an objection, the chair will allow a subcommittee, a member of the full committee, but not a member of this committee, to ask questions. The chairman of the European Committee, Subcommittee, Mr. Rohrbacher from California.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. There's a lot of discussion about trade going on Capitol Hill these days. Glad that you are here. And just a couple of items just for, in terms of OPIC, is OPIC policy, there's been an ongoing problem with a constituent that I've had that his family owned a major company in Ethiopia, and frankly, they have been offering like a pittance as compensation for this very expensive piece of property and business. OPIC has decided not to fund that situation, not to be involved in Ethiopia until situations like that are corrected. Is that still the policy that if a government like Ethiopia is engaged in these type of activities that are denying U.S. citizens the right to compensation for property that they've confiscated, we still have that policy that we are not providing loans in that country?
Mr. Rohrbacher, we've spoken about this before, and as
Yes.
it stands now, OPIC continues to operate under the guidance of the Secretary of State in terms of selecting the countries in which we operate. That being said, we are not active currently with any major projects in Ethiopia.
Right.
I'm not involved with the details of this. That's really, we've left
would
this to
hope
the
that
State Department, but I know that the U.S. government...
Let me ask you then.
Yes.
That's good, number one. Thank you for that you're not doing Ethiopia. But is that a standard policy that if we have outstanding claims by American citizens against a particular government that we are not going to be improving or approving transactions in that country?
That is not one of our policies. We do believe that when U.S. investors invest in these markets, they bring with them very high standards of environment, labor, and human rights standards, as well as an improvement in the governance standards in those countries.
Mm-hmm.
So we see a direct correlation between foreign direct investment flowing to countries and improvements in the business climate.
Well, let me note, I believe that that's encouraging dictatorship and the worst kind of situation. You have the American citizens themselves who have been denied due compensation for confiscated property. For us to go in is ridiculous, but I appreciate the fact that at least in Ethiopia that's kept in mind, because my constituent is having that problem. About foreign, by the way, I take it that OPIC is engaged in actually promoting the development of businesses overseas in these various countries. Is that not creating competition for American products?
It is not. We certify that not one of our projects causes any damage to the U.S. economy, nor causes the loss of even one job in the U.S.
So you don't have any projects that you're financing to develop, to build in a foreign country, that you're not financing anything that has any competition with American counterparts. Is that correct?
That's correct, sir.
All right. Well, we'll check into that, but we'll have to see. In terms of the foreign banks that you mentioned about the Export-Import Bank coming to you, these banks have come and said, well, so you are guaranteeing some loans with foreign banks, but mainly American banks. Do banks benefit from this guarantee?
Well, the benefit really goes to the exporter, because
No, but that's not the question. Do the banks benefit from this?
well, the banks pay a fee
Yes.
for insurance, and in exchange for that fee, we insure the loan.
Okay. So, but the banks aren't benefiting, or the
Well, you can say they're benefiting, but they're paying for
the
it.
banks are benefiting? Let's just put it this way: they wouldn't be coming to you with customers if they were not benefiting.
Right.
Okay, so we have, in some way, basically guaranteed the banks the profit that they will make from the deal, or they at least will not have a loss from that deal. Is that correct?
We provide insurance to the banks so they make the
Right.
loan, exactly.
Let me just suggest that that is crony capitalism, where we take the banks and we make sure that they're not going to lose money, and we put our taxpayers' money at risk. And the question is whether or not that would happen in the private sector. You know, in the film business, they have a thing called bonding. You have a project and they bond it. Why don't we just, if you're making a profit every year, like you suggest, why don't we just leave that to the private sector then? Can't they do bonding with these banks that are looking for a guarantee that they're not going to lose money?
Congressman, the private sector does a spectacular job. They just don't do all the job. So we finance about, as I've said, about 2% of U.S. exports. A third of them go to developing countries. Private sector does a great job. They just don't do it in every market and every product category.
Right.
Gentleman's time has expired.
Thank you.
Thank the gentleman. I thank the witnesses for being here. I want to advise the witnesses that all members have the opportunity to present written questions to the witnesses. Several members were not here, could not be here, and I'd encourage the members to put those questions in writing as soon as possible, regardless of where they are on this issue that we have been discussing today. And with that, thank you to the witnesses for being here, and we will begin with our second panel as soon as they're seated. The chair is ready to begin the second panel if the witnesses will be seated. Chair will introduce the next four witnesses. I want to thank the witnesses for waiting all morning to give their testimony. It is appreciated. Mr. Daniel Eikenson is director of the Herbert Stiefel Center for Trade and Policy at the Cato Institute. Mr. Eikenson has held several positions focusing on international trade planning and is widely published in the area of trade policy. General Jim Jones is the founder of the Jones Group International and previously has served as the National Security Advisor to the President of the United States. General Jones has served our country with a long, distinguished military career, including leading NATO military operations as Commander of the United States European Command and Supreme Allied Commander in Europe. Ms. Susan Jaime is the founder of Ferreira Coffee International in San Antonio. In addition to roasting coffee, she has joined with Texas A&M's AgriLife projects to teach coffee growers around the globe how to grade, roast, and market their coffee beans. And Carly, is that correct, Carly? Carly Sadawand is Vice President of the Global Sales and Administration at Resin Technology, LLC. Ms. Sadawand took over the global petrochemical trading and compounding company from her father, an entrepreneur chemist. We'll begin with Mr. Eikenson. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, Chairman Poe, Ranking Member Keating, and members of the subcommittee. I am Dan Eikenson, Director of the Herbert A. Stiefel Center for Trade Policy Studies at the Cato Institute. Thank you for the invitation to share my views with you today concerning trade promotion agencies and the U.S. foreign policy. The views I express are my own and should not be construed as representing any official positions of the Cato Institute. To the extent that today's hearing will help clarify some of these issues and prompt a serious effort to reform and retire some of the redundant, distortionary, and frankly, scandal-prone agencies among the panoply of federal offerings, I am pleased to be of assistance. U.S. trade promotion agencies are in the business of promoting exports, not trade in the more inclusive sense. That is worth noting because despite some of the wrong-headed mercantilist assumptions that undergird U.S. trade policy, that exports are good and imports are bad, the fact is that the real benefits of trade are transmitted through imports, not through exports. In January 2010, President Obama set a national goal of doubling U.S. exports in 5 years, and prominent in that plan was a larger role for government in promoting exports, including expanded non-market lending programs to finance export activity, an increase in the number of Commerce Department foreign outposts to promote U.S. business, and an increase in federal agency chaperoned marketing trips. But the NEI neglected a broad swath of worthy reforms by ignoring the domestic laws, regulations, taxes, and other policies that handicap U.S. businesses in their competition for sales in the United States and abroad. For example, nearly 60% of the value of U.S. imports in 2014 consisted of intermediate goods, capital goods, and other raw materials. Those are the purchases of U.S. businesses, not consumers. Yet many of those imports are subject to customs duties, which raise the cost of production for the U.S.-based companies that need them, making them less competitive at home and abroad. U.S. duties on products like sugar, steel, magnesium, polyvinyl chloride, and other crucial manufacturing inputs have chased companies to foreign shores where those imports are less expensive, and they've deterred foreign companies from setting up shop stateside. Policymakers should stop conflating the interests of exporters with the national interest and commit to policies that reduce frictions throughout the supply chain, from product conception to consumption. Why should U.S. taxpayers underwrite and U.S. policymakers promote the interests of exporters anyway, when the benefits of those exports accrue primarily to the shareholders of the companies enjoying the subsidized marketing or matchmaking? There is no national ownership of private export revenues. If policymakers seek a more appropriate target for economic policy, it should be to attract and retain direct investment, which is the seed of all economic activity, including exports. Now, given the exalted status of exports in Washington's economic policy narrative, it is understandable why agencies would want to portray themselves as indispensable to U.S. export success. But on that metric, none of the subject agencies is scarcely relevant. EXIM supported $27.4 billion in exports in 2014. USTDA supports approximately $2.5 billion per year, and OPIC less than $2 billion. In aggregate, these agencies support less than 2% of all U.S. exports. But the relevant economic question concerns the costs and benefits of these agencies to the U.S. economy. So let me focus a little bit on EXIM. EXIM financing helps two sets of companies: U.S. firms whose exports are subsidized through direct loans or loan guarantees, and the foreign firms who purchase those subsidized exports. But those same transactions impose costs on two different sets of companies: competing U.S. firms in the same industry who do not get EXIM banking, and U.S. firms in downstream industries whose foreign competition is now benefiting from reduced capital costs courtesy of the U.S. government. EXIM financing reduces the cost of doing business for the lucky U.S. exporter and reduces the cost of capital for his foreign customer. But it hurts U.S. competitors of the U.S. exporter, as well as U.S. competitors of his foreign customer by putting them at relative cost disadvantages. According to the findings of a recent Cato Institute study, the downstream costs alone amount to a tax of approximately $2.8 billion every year, and the victims include companies in each of the 21 broad U.S. manufacturing sectors. The notion that because Beijing, Brasilia, and Brussels subsidize their exporters, Washington must too, sweeps under the rug the fact that the United States is a major export credit subsidizer that has been engaged in doling out such a largesse since 1934, well before the founding of the People's Republic of China. To say that U.S. exporters need assistance with financing to level the playing field suggests that they lack advantages among the multitude of considerations that inform the purchasing decision. Moreover, the fact that less than 2% of U.S. export value goes through export promotion agencies suggests this rationale for EXIM is bogus. Congress should allow EXIM to expire at the end of next month, and the administration should announce plans to bring cases to the WTO against governments operating their export credit agencies in violation of agreed-upon limits under the Agreement on Subsidies and Countervailing Measures. The combination of the carrot of U.S. withdrawal from business, the business of export credit financing, and the stick of WTO litigation would likely incent other governments to reduce and possibly eliminate their own subsidy programs. For better or worse, at different times and for different purposes over the years, U.S. trade policy has been a tool of U.S. foreign policy. Trade preference programs, trade agreements, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, investment treaties, trade sanctions, infrastructure funding, and trade financing have all been pursued or deployed for reasons not entirely economic in nature. Pursuing strategic objectives through trade policy has a long history. The State Department's mission is to shape and sustain a peaceful, prosperous, just, and democratic world and foster conditions for stability and progress for the benefit of the American people and people everywhere. That broad mission may justify one or two export promotion agencies, but according to the CRS, the Congressional Research Service, there are at least 20 such agencies within the U.S. government with overlapping responsibilities and in some cases working at cross purposes. 30 seconds. EXIM's Inspector General...
Sorry, you cannot have 30 seconds.
No?
Make your finish. Your statement is in the record. We all have it.
Okay. Concluding thought, the United States maintains enormous commercial advantages over other countries. We have the world's largest market, strong institutions, including respect for private property and the rule of law, et cetera, et cetera. These things underlie the strength of the U.S. economy, which is crucial to reaching U.S. security and foreign policy goals going forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Atkinson. You got more in 6 minutes than anybody I've ever heard in my life. But thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Chair recognizes General Jones. First of all, General Jones, thank you for your service to our country.
Thank you, sir. Mr. Chairman, Ranking Member Keating, committee members, thank you for holding this very important hearing and for inviting me to testify before you today. With your permission, I'd like to submit 2 items for the full hearing record, an op-ed I authored on the national security implications of the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership and Trans-Pacific Partnership and the task ahead, an article on the dynamics of U.S. global engagement in the 21st century. As requested by the committee, I'll briefly summarize my statement and look forward to your questions. I've had the honor of serving our nation's uniform for over 40 years. Much of that time was during the Cold War, when the world was a very different place, defined by the long struggle between the West and the former Soviet Union. Ultimately, democracy prevailed over communism, and our ideals proved superior to those of our adversaries, as did our resolve and the military might of the United States and the NATO alliance. As a result, freedom prevailed, and despite today's many challenges, the truth is that freer societies, freer markets, and freer trade have achieved a great leap forward in the human condition, and our values have contributed immeasurably to a better world and to America's interests around that world. But today, the geostrategic operating environment of the 21st century is vastly different from that of the past century. As such, we need a much broader toolkit to be successful. Maintaining global stability, essential to America's peace and prosperity, is no longer a function solely of our ability to deploy and defeat, but also of our capacity to engage and endow, and ultimately to turn promise and opportunity into jobs and a higher quality of life for those seeking true freedom. By leading on trade, the United States tightens bonds with allies around the globe, strengthens influence in would-be hotspots, and fosters greater global stability through expanding economic cooperation, the kind envisioned by the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, and the African Growth and Opportunity Act advanced by the extension of Trade Promotion Authority. So if America wishes to remain a nation of great leadership and influence in the years and decades ahead, we shouldn't shrink from competing in the trade-based global economy, the world mainly of America's making in the last century, and one I think we can be extremely proud of. But much is riding on our success. Economically and geostrategically, 95% of the world's customers live outside our borders. Most are hungry for American goods and services and solutions. And for this reason, America's future jobs and prosperity depend greatly on trade and global economic engagement and leadership. But it's equally true that 95% of the hearts and minds America must win to achieve a more peaceful and prosperous future also live outside our borders. So commercial diplomacy, the kind the Secretary of Commerce Penny Pritzker advocates, is a key ingredient in the strategy for winning them. Importantly, this hearing was conceived to analyze whether the U.S. trade promotion agencies play an important role in U.S. foreign policy. My answer is an unequivocal yes. They play a crucial role. Many of the pertinent facts are presented in my full statement, but I would simply boil down my reasoning to the following points. 1, trade and trade promotion are critical to American jobs and prosperity. A prosperous America is far better able to protect its country's values and advance its interests in a dangerous world. 2, trade promotion is critical to America's security. As a former NATO commander, service chief, and national security advisor, I've seen firsthand the geostrategic importance of American economic engagement. Where the U.S. private sector is not present, America's influence suffers, and this vacuum is filled by economic and geostrategic competitors, and in the developing world, is often filled by those who don't share either our values or our principles, and the result is a less stable and secure world. 3, many opponents of trade promotion agencies base their arguments on a vision of a world with no export financing and no foreign government support for our competitors, where markets are untrammeled by state-directed export finance and other support. But in today's real world, approximately 60 export credit agencies are jockeying to offer enticing financial terms to win more sales for their companies and workers, often at the expense of U.S. companies. Russia and China have expanded their state-backed export support, even as we continue to deliberate on the future of the EXIM Bank and our desire for expanded trade agreements. They and the leaders of America's other export competitors would welcome the United States ending export finance and trade promotion programs, which means more business for their companies and more influence for them around the world. Although I agree that we should aspire to a world of pure private sector competition, unilaterally disarming by eliminating the EXIM Bank and our other trade promotion agencies is not the answer. It would destroy the U.S. Treasury's leverage in negotiating reductions to state-backed export finance that would be observed by all, creating the level playing field that we should all seek. Finally, I agree that Congress has a sacred responsibility to ensure that taxpayers' dollars are used wisely. Our country has yet to see an agency or program that couldn't be improved. In that regard, the constant work of reforming and refreshing our initiatives is crucial, but let's improve them where we can and not eliminate them. After 4 decades of service to the nation, a strong aversion is ingrained in me, as I know it is in you, to anything that threatens our national well-being. Among them, anything that would set back our country's economic competitiveness in the world. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, General Jones. Chair recognizes Ms. Jaime.
Mr. Chairman and Trade Subcommittee of the House of Representatives, thank you for inviting me to share my perspective on the importance of the EXIM Bank. I have been working in the coffee industry for more than 18 years and started my own company, Farah Coffee International, in 2009, with $50 in the bank and a passion for international trade and soft commodities. From the start, the heart, soul, and goal of my business has always been to help coffee growers worldwide. I learned very quickly that the coffee grower is the last one in the chain of the coffee trade business to get a fair price for their product, and the last, if ever, to get training to properly assess the quality of their coffee or effectively negotiate a fair price with international buyers. To make a lasting difference in the lives of those coffee growers, by paying them fairly and according to the quality of their coffee, to prevent families from being broken apart because parents or young adults must leave their home countries and families to come to the United States to work illegally, my business plan had to change. If Farah coffee sold only to distributors in the state of Texas or any other domestic state, we could only expect to sell 1 or 2 pallets, approximately 1,200 pounds at a time. In contrast, when we're able to secure an international contract with an international distributor, orders are generally for at least 1 full container, which is 48,000 pounds average. It is easy to see the advantage. Behind each bag of Farah organic flavor coffee or each bag of Farah liquid coffee, there are 7 U.S. small businesses that supply products and services contributing to our finished product that is labeled USDA organic, roasted, Q-graded, and manufactured in San Antonio, Texas. Farah Coffee has successfully started offering our roasted specialty coffees internationally, thanks to the support that the Ex-Im Bank has provided. By their doing due diligence in checking that the distributors whom we establish relationships and make contracts are legitimate and that we do not get involved with dubious, unreliable criminal groups while conducting international trade. The Ex-Im Bank has truly ensured our success. The Ex-Im Bank also literally ensures payment on our shipments and has given my company the peace of mind of knowing that the value of the product shipped is secure and legally insured. The Ex-Im Bank also allows me the ability to offer products that have higher quality for the gourmet company or the gourmet market. Farah Coffee International, along with the other small companies that are our partners, is completely dependent for our growth and survival on our ability to sell internationally. Internationally, there is no market saturation, and USA-made and USDA organic products have a great deal of value to the consumer. The Ex-Im Bank is the one and only entity that we can rely on to help us continue to grow, be competitive in markets that are not available to us in our own country, and to give us a necessary competitive edge and in international trade. My small company, by purchasing coffee directly from the growers, is contributing to stop illegal immigration and the displacement of family units. We also help 7 other small U.S. businesses with opportunities to hire more workers and increase their revenue by purchasing more products for our international contracts. Without the Ex-Im Bank offering their services that allow my company to engage in this type of international trade contracts, I will not be able to grow my business beyond the saturated coffee market that we have in the USA. The Ex-Im Bank can also do so much more. It can help me and other companies like mine, which conduct businesses that are usually not funded by the regular bank system because we have contracts in international markets, by not acting as a conventional bank to qualify exporters like me for financial low-interest loans. Instead of using only a credit score to qualify a company for funding, Ex-Im Bank will look at and assess the overall potential, growth, and increased revenue that can be achieved by additional funding. That is the vision that is needed, and that's what we are asking for. My company is not able to get loans from conventional banks of all of my products because all my products are bought in cash. That is the way the majority of specialty coffee and tea companies operate. We do not have a history of loan payments or credits with coffee or tea growers. We need Ex-Im Bank support. The Ex-Im Bank is crucial, vital, and important entity that I and many other U.S. exporting companies depend on for survival, growth, and the ability to compete successfully in business. Every USA company that has the capability to export and do business internationally, whether that company is small or large, contributes to the health of our national economy and our country's leadership and innovation in the development of more qualified and competitive businesses and individuals who see our potential markets as global opportunities for the kind of success that is needed for the greater good. Every aspect of the Ex-Im Bank has the potential to create positive and strong advancement for the good of us all and the good of the USA. Thank you for your time, kind attention, and for inviting me to share my story on behalf of all the exporters in the USA.
Thank you, Ms. Jaime. Ms. Sadowon.
Thank you, Chairman Poe, Ranking Member Keating, and the other subcommittee members for inviting me. I hope that my story can actually point to the interconnection of small to medium-sized businesses across the United States as exporters, some direct and some indirect. Resin Technology is a now $100 million global petrochemical trading and compounding company that's been in operation for close to 20 years. I'm second generation of my family business. It was started by my parents, and it's still a father-daughter run business today. We sell about 98% U.S.-made petrochemicals, and Houston, Texas is an extremely important area for us. And we export into over 30 countries worldwide, some developing nations and some more mature economies. The majority of our sales go into vinyl construction products worldwide, such as water pipe, windows, wire and cable, and even some more sophisticated engineered parts, all dependent on the level of development in those import countries. Today, our largest export markets are Canada, Europe, very importantly the Caribbean, and Mexico, Latin, and South America, accounting for about 50% of our 2014 sales. It should be noted that we started the business at about 70% U.S. sales, and with the help of EXIM financing, it's now over 70% export sales. So it's made a huge difference in sort of where our business has gone. We have fierce competition from large commodity-oriented international trading firms and other foreign producers, with the largest ones being between Korea, China, and especially Japan, where they sell very much on price and very low cost to no cost financing in markets where we have to compete. Prior to the housing decline, we were solely focused in the U.S. and Canadian markets, with over 70% sales in the U.S. We started exporting at the end of '06, doubled our sales year on year for many years, we didn't really have the idea that the housing boom would persist, so we knew that export needed to be a part of our future growth plans. And obviously 2008, 2009 proved that point very clearly, and we need to compensate for those lower sales, since everything really, the largest portion goes into construction projects. In 2011, Bank of America suggested using Export-Import Bank to back our export receivables and inventory via our working capital guarantee program, where domestic sales would remain under their current structure. We had, for probably 2 years, tried to find other ways to finance our exports with Bank of America by increasing the size of our insurance policies. We looked at inventory appraisals to try and increase the advance rates. We do use an external credit insurance agency, which is a big portion of what's underwritten, but it never could meet the size that we needed to really compete in the export market on the buy and on the sell side, because a very important part of our business is being able to finance the supply side with these major Fortune 500 companies. What we did is increase our advance rates up to 90% of receivables and 75% of export inventory, affording us to be able to compete with our Asian counterparts, which was the most important part, because oftentimes they have not only subsidies on their freight, but their financing seems almost zero to very low in comparison. They'll offer extremely long terms where we normally try to finance 60 to 90 days. Sometimes they'll finance 120, 270 days. It's a very different Wild West in certain areas type of market. And since our product is more commodity elements, the 75% loan rates on inventory really isn't considered excessive. And our credit that we do with customers is either through our U.S. Army's credit insurance policy or via letters of credit, all with Bank of America or the local banks in the United States. In our view, the Working Capital Guarantee Program with EXIM has been more disciplined. They've audited us more often than even our domestic program has. They have very detailed, down to customer level on sales. We have to provide waiver letters for foreign currency transactions, which is very important in our markets. There's tough management of credit overseas, and we also have to have comprehensive marine and warehouse insurance policies. EXIM financing is actually somewhat expensive, but where we couldn't find any other options that didn't include factoring or discounting via the bank with letters of credit where not every customer can, there really was no other option for us to really increase to where we needed to be. And really, Bank of America said they just couldn't justify the export receivables because they didn't have the global infrastructure or for inventory if something did go wrong to actually collect on those receivables, which is a very important point. But the other point that I first brought up was how we partner with hundreds of small to medium-sized U.S. businesses across the United States. We are in the Boston market, and obviously we have people there, but also we have a lot of people that are near the ports in Houston and Louisiana that do trucking, toll blending, packaging, warehousing, freight forwarding, ones that don't even realize how much they would be affected if EXIM wasn't financed. 3 such firms that I've mentioned before: Fleur-de-Lis Worldwide, which is in Chairman Poe's area, TCI, a packaging and trucking firm in New Orleans, Louisiana, and JPI South in Pasadena, Texas, all have doubled and tripled their workforces from our loyalty and working and partnering together. Now with the new boom that we may see in front of us, petrochemicals, it's even more important for us to capitalize on those. We personally have doubled our workforce from 4 to 12 people, and we've actually opened an office in Houston because of such the concentration that we need there.
Can you summarize the rest of your comments? We have your statement for the record.
No problem. Yeah, no problem. Basically, for us, if EXIM is not authorized, I think is really the most important point for us, is for us personally as Resin Technology would probably drop back to just a North American business. Would probably be somewhere between $30 and $50 million in sales. We wouldn't be able to negotiate the actual export contracts. There are about 5 major U.S. producers that we work with. 3 of them we're discussing export contracts, some we have in place now. And all of them continually ask what's happening with EXIM. And if that isn't reauthorized, that would obviously affect on our actually signing those contracts for export. So we'd have to reduce in sales, we'd have reduced staffing, and obviously all the multitude of other businesses that we work together. Because really the foreign companies that are our competitors, they just don't have the loyalty to our other U.S. businesses that we would. And I think that's the most important thing for us.
Thank you, Ms. Sadawan. Thank you. Chair recognizes itself for 5 minutes. I want to thank all 4 of you for being here. Have a lot of questions. I'll submit some of them in writing for the reasons I mentioned earlier. As I mentioned in my opening statement, Houston, Texas, we get half of our economy is based upon the port of Houston, and we are an export port. We send stuff all over the world that goes through our port. So trade is important. Unlike the West Coast, primarily import ports. Ms. Jaime and Ms. Sadawan, I want to start with y'all and then move over to our gentlemen, ladies being first, of course. You've heard all of the comments by all of the witnesses. You've both been here since we started early this morning. You've probably read, when you had time not doing your work in your business, to read the press about EXIM Bank and the volatile controversy over it. So my questions will be first to both of you specifically, because you are in the business world and you use EXIM Bank. Ms. Jaime, tell me a little bit more about how your business got started in San Antonio.
Yes, Mr. Chairman, my business got started basically by going to Latin America and finding coffees that were specialty graded, which is one of the highest quality in coffee, bringing that coffee into the United States and selling it here in the United States as a micro roaster. Micro roasters, generally they do and roast approximately 20 pounds per batch. And as time developed, we started distributing more to our market in San Antonio, and we dedicated ourselves to do commercial roasting for chefs, restaurants, hospitals. We are not in the retail because the retail is oversaturated. If you go to the grocery stores, you have more than a dozen different labels, of course, of coffees. So it's not a good idea for my business to have my coffee sitting in a shelf in a supermarket where it's not going to be noticeable.
So if there was no EXIM Bank, how would that affect your business?
Tremendously.
How? How would it affect you?
It would affect it because I'm not going to be able to grow as quickly and help as many coffee growers as we can when we're exporting.
Would you be able to export if you did not have the EXIM Bank?
No.
And how much of the business is export business?
40% of my business right now.
You mentioned in your testimony that EXIM helps screen your distributors in foreign countries to make sure you're not working with criminals. What does that mean?
Well, basically it means that when we have a submission from a distributor overseas, they give us their information. We send that to the EXIM Bank. The EXIM Bank checks to make sure that there is no problems with their payments, that they have a good record of being an international distributor, if they have a history of doing any business with any manufacturer in the United States. And once we get that information back to us, then we can negotiate better with that distributor. If they have never had a history of doing business in the United States, then we're not going to be able to offer them any kind of payment terms, and they're going to have to pay for that order up front.
You mentioned that your business helps stop illegal immigration. How in the world does your business help stop illegal immigration?
In the majority of the countries that coffee is grown, the coffee grower is very poor and is very limited in the resources they have. It's countless and countless the times that every year that I go to the Latin American countries, I find coffee growers that say, please represent us well, ma'am. Please sell our product well and pay us well so that I don't have to leave my country, my family, and have to go and work in the United States illegally.
All right, Ms. Sadowon, same line of questioning for you. I'll try to move as quick as I can. If you don't have XM, how does that affect your Boston, Houston business? Microphone.
It is interesting how it crosses between both of you gentlemen. Really what it means for us is no growth. Really in the United States, when housing did crash, there was also a lot of consolidation of U.S. customers. A lot of manufacturers started to consolidate. They were bought by global conglomerates. So the U.S. market and manufacturing actually shrunk, which is where we would sell into. So the market isn't even still the same as it then as it isn't the same now as it was then. And really it wouldn't eliminate exports, but it would far reduce them and make them much less attractive because we really couldn't compete. We just wouldn't have the financing to offer terms. When I buy from U.S. producers, they give me 30 to 60 days terms. I need time to actually export, prepare, and sell those exports, and then I have to compete on terms. I need potentially 60 to 120 days of working capital financing, which if your line is being held and it's not large enough because you can't lend against enough of your inventory and receivables, you just don't have enough capacity to.
So why not go to Bank of America and get those 120-day time limits as opposed to 30 to 60?
So LCs are wonderful. If I could do every single customer on a documentary letter of credit that came directly to me and was all the terms that I wanted, then I would do every one. But in certain areas, especially Latin America, as I'm sure she knows, LCs are not something that they're able to do. Many countries.
The banks won't do those.
They won't do them.
American banks won't do those.
No, the local banks there, the customers won't actually open an LC for them. And if they do, it could cost as much as 30 or 40%. They're just don't make sense in a commodity market.
Okay. Thank you. My time has expired. I'll yield to the gentleman from Boston, Massachusetts.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I want to just follow a couple of threads. One with you, Ms. Sadowon. You mentioned about what other international areas, other countries actually, are offering in terms of some of the financial terms that that you need. So you're competing against them. Can you tell us, you mentioned Asia generally, can you tell us what countries and what they're doing that makes it so hard for you to compete?
So the loudest one, I would say, would probably be from the trading companies in Japan, where their lending rates are so low that they are able to offer terms that far outweigh what I can compete with. I may have the same price because we have competitive products coming out of the United States, offer a service. We're maybe even offering the same types of products from the United States, but oftentimes they're also offering them and 4 other countries worth of products, but they can do so maybe doubling my terms. They consistently extend, and so if I can't compete with that, I'm not able to offer that to those customers on a long-term basis.
So it just gives you a level playing field.
Absolutely, absolutely.
The other thread I want to just follow up, and thank you for your service, General Jones, and having you here it just prompted this question that I wasn't prepared to ask, but your background, and I think you're uniquely positioned to answer this. Looking at our trade issues, shared values with Europe, and looking at the instance of what's going on in Ukraine and some of the other countries that are around there. Can you draw a parallel to the advantages of our trade, particularly with countries of shared values, and our security in this part, given your NATO background?
Sorry, thank you for that question. I think that we're living in a very different century. And whereas the 20th century was characterized by a lot of violence, global wars, and who had the strongest and the best armies won the fight, the 21st century to me is much more of an economic competition, and this is the path that the country. This is a national security issue as well, and I believe that if you look at Mr. Putin's aggression in the Crimea and the Ukraine and the response to it is primarily economic, and there are projects afoot in Europe and that the U.S. is also participating in to draw up long-term consequences for Mr. Putin's behavior. We can do something about reducing Europe's dependence on Russian energy, but it's an economic response. We can help Ukraine divest itself of being too dependent on Russian energy, and so I think that the times that we live in, we need to have the tools to do that. The Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership is already our largest alliance with over $1 trillion in trade, $4 trillion in investment, and 13 million jobs. And this is a way that we can connect with Europe in the 21st century, much the same way we did in the 20th century, but with a much more balanced approach vis-a-vis military and economic development. So many of our nation's responses to our international threats that are facing us are going to be economic. The day that ISIS is defeated in Iraq is a day that we need to have an international plan, hopefully with U.S. leadership, to have economic recovery for that region. Because if we don't, as we did in the Iraq invasion, Iraq will just continue to spin out of control. So in my view, it's a simple formula. Security plus economic development plus governance and rule of law are the three components that have to be factored into international engagements in the 21st century.
And I would mention, too, that some of these countries wouldn't be able to participate in the sanctions if they're not strong and join with us, which I think really thwarted Putin's aggression more than anything else. And the second thing, even with NATO, part of their 2% contribution that's supposed to go is limited because of their economic well-being. And that's important, too, because hopefully after Wales and an economy that is advancing, although too slowly, they'll be able to meet that challenge.
The only reason Iran is at the table is because of economic sanctions. The only reason Mr. Putin is going to find a way out of his problems in the Ukraine is because the economic conditions will ultimately force him to do that. I believe that to be true.
Well, thank you for your comments. I yield back.
Thank the gentleman. I have a couple of questions left for Mr. Eikenson and General Jones, and then I'll yield to the ranking member if he has further questions. Mr. Eikenson, if the two questions, I'll give you both questions and then answer both of them. If Ex-Im Bank is reauthorized, what reforms do you think must be in the reauthorization? And second, you said that manufacturers are victims of the Export-Import Bank. National Association of Manufacturers representing large and small manufacturers support the reauthorization. So could you explain that discrepancy and also answer the first question?
Sure.
Briefly.
Thank you for the question. Well, I hope that Ex-Im is not reauthorized. I believe in free market capitalism, and I think we should try it. But if it is to be reformed, to me, the big problem is not necessarily the burden on taxpayers. It is the absence of concern toward other companies. When an export sale is subsidized, that customer that foreign customer benefits at the expense of the U.S. customers of that U.S. exporter. And I know that Mr. Hochberg mentioned that they do a cost-benefit analysis of all of their pending transactions. I rather doubt that they do that with respect to, they don't go into full mode with respect to the impact on downstream industries. The study that I did took a look at the costs that are actually imposed on these companies by seeing how important the export product is to the downstream industry as a manufacturing input. And based on that, and based on the largesse that is doled out to the exporting industry and to the downstream industry, I was able to calculate a cost. The problem is, this is a situation of what is seen and that which is not seen. We see the export subsidies, and we all seem to like exports, and we celebrate that, but we don't often see the impact on the downstream industries. Delta is a big company, and it was able to discern it and bring it to the attention of the public, but there are lots of companies, smaller companies, that rely on inputs that don't even really realize that they're being affected in a relative way vis-a-vis their foreign competitors. So some mechanism that brings that to the fore so that there is a channel through which companies can evaluate the impact on them and maybe seek damages. That sort of parlays into the second question. The manufacturing sector has many, many victims in a variety of states. It costs about $2.8 billion per year.
Then why does the National Association of Manufacturers support Ex-Im Bank?
It's because those who benefit, the companies that benefit from it, are the ones that are speaking out. They want Ex-Im. We've heard some stories here about how crucial Ex-Im is to their businesses. The companies that are that suffer and that incur costs are often unaware of what is going on. So
they don't know they're victims.
Many times they don't know that they're victims. They're not as big as Delta.
I need to reclaim my time because we're about out of time. General Jones, be more specific. You make the statement that Ex-Im Bank is important for national security. Why is Ex-Im Bank important for national security, and what would be the consequences if we didn't have it?
Mr. Chairman, if I could just quote from my formal statement, and I quote, "If Ex-Im Bank is shut down and the United States leaves the field on export financing, such a vacuum will not only undermine U.S. business abroad and U.S. jobs at home, but undermine American influence and economic leadership at a time when it's needed more than ever." I believe it's an instrument that is valuable. I think the numbers are impressive. And I don't believe it's in our national interest to, if I can use a military term, to unilaterally disarm. If we do this, you can be sure that the Russians, the Chinese, our friends in Europe, they're not doing this. They are competing, and they're competing every single day with their missions, not only trade missions, but their heads of state missions. And I believe that the future is that for us is that the public and private sector need to find more ways to work together, not ways in which we drift apart. And I think that's a very fundamental difference between us and the rest of the competitive world that we deal with.
Thank you, General Jones. Chair will yield to the gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Keating, the ranking member.
Well, briefly, in response to Mr. Eikenson's concern, I can only ask the two people that are actually in business, Ms. Jaime and Ms. Saidawan, if you're worried about downstream affecting it, well, in a void like that, that downstream, I'm afraid, is going to be taken by another country, acting in ways that we don't, directly getting involved as a country, funding. So in a void in that downstream, it's going to be filled somewhere by someone. Yeah. We want it filled by the U.S. Could either of you comment on that? Am I right in that thinking?
Yes, Mr. Congressman. Basically, just in my field, coffee being the second most powerful traded commodity, if we don't act as importers and also exporters and be able to fill right now the emerging markets, international markets for specialty coffees, you're right. Somebody else is going to get it. one of the main problems that I have when I go to these countries to buy those coffees that are specialty and they're high quality is that the Chinese buyers are coming in and being very aggressive to be able to get those coffees. And since the coffee grower really does not know how to negotiate for those contracts, they're still in the losing side. So it is important for us not only to go be competitive in purchasing those coffees, but immediately put them in the international market, that we have a great opportunity to do that right now.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. I yield back and thank all of you for taking the time to be part of this hearing.
Gentleman yields back. I also want to thank you for being here most of the morning to hear the testimony and your testimony. And as I mentioned to the first panel, there may be questions submitted by members on both sides on these issues, and they will be submitted to you because of the necessity of hearing your answers from other members of Congress that may not have been able to ask you questions. In any event, I thank you for being here, and the subcommittee is adjourned.